The airport never slept. It only breathed differently at night. At gate C-17, fluorescent lights hummed above polished floors, reflecting hurried shoes, rolling suitcases, and tired faces moving with practiced urgency. Announcements echoed in neutral tones, detached and mechanical. Somewhere between departures and arrivals, authority blended into routine so smoothly that no one questioned it anymore. Until they did. Marcus Reed stood alone near the security corridor, a carry-on bag at his feet, his jacket folded neatly over one arm. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't lost. He wasn't confused. He stood the way someone stands when they know exactly where they're supposed to be. That calm made the officers notice him. Two uniformed airport police slowed as they passed, then stopped. One turned back. The other rested a hand near his radio. Their eyes lingered longer than necessary. A glance became a stare. A stare became suspicion. "Sir," one officer said, voice flat but firm. "Step over here." Marcus looked up. His expression didn't change. No irritation. No fear. Just attention. "Is there a problem?" he asked. The question alone shifted the air. The officer didn't answer it. He never intended to. "Where you headed?" the second officer asked. "Atlanta," Marcus replied. "Final leg. ID." Marcus reached slowly into his jacket pocket and handed over his identification. The officer took it, barely glanced, then frowned as if he'd found something wrong even though nothing was. "What do you do for work?" the officer asked. "I travel," Marcus said. "Often?" That was enough. The officer's jaw tightened. He looked at his partner, then back at Marcus. "You're coming with us." Marcus didn't move. "Am I being detained?" The question landed hard. Passengers nearby slowed. A woman pulling her suitcase paused mid-step. A man at the charging station lifted his head. Phones stayed down, but eyes stayed up. The first officer stepped closer. Too close. "Don't get smart," he said. "We asked you to move." "I'm asking under what authority?" Marcus replied calmly. That calm irritated them more than resistance ever could. The second officer reached for Marcus's arm. That's when the tone changed. "You need to understand something," the officer said, voice louder now, for the benefit of witnesses. "If you don't comply, this becomes a problem." Marcus looked down at the hand gripping his sleeve, then back up. His voice stayed even. "It already is." The officer twisted his arm behind his back. Hard. Fast. Unnecessary. Gasps rippled through the terminal. "What's happening?" someone whispered. "Is he resisting?" another voice asked. Marcus didn't shout. He didn't fight. He didn't plead. He simply absorbed the pressure, his jaw tightening as pain flashed briefly across his face. "Hands behind your back," the officer barked, though they already were. Metal cuffs clicked shut, phones came out. The officers moved him away from the gate, past stares and murmurs, past the glowing departure board that still listed his flight as on time. No explanation was offered. None was required. Not yet. Marcus glanced once over his shoulder, meeting the eyes of a man filming openly now. There was no panic in his expression, only calculation. They escorted him toward a restricted corridor marked, "Authorized personnel only." The irony went unnoticed by everyone except Marcus. "Sir, you're being detained for further questioning," the officer said. "For what?" Marcus asked. "Failure to comply." "Suspicious behavior." Marcus nodded slightly, as if confirming something to himself. As the door closed behind them, cutting off the terminal noise, one officer muttered, "You people always think the rules don't apply." Marcus said nothing that he didn't need to, because the rules were about to apply very differently than they imagined. The hallway behind the restricted door was quieter, narrower, stripped of the airport's public polish. Beige walls. Scuffed floors. A security camera blinking red above them, unnoticed by the officers but very much noticed by Marcus. They walked him faster now, not because he resisted, because they wanted control back. "Watch your step," one officer said, tightening his grip as if Marcus might suddenly bolt. Even though his hands were cuffed behind him, Marcus adjusted his pace without complaint. His breathing stayed steady. That steadiness unsettled them. They were used to questions by now. Excuses. Anger. Fear. This man offered none of it. They pushed him into a small secondary screening room, no windows, one metal table, 3 plastic chairs bolted to the floor. A sign on the wall read Security Interview Area. The door shut with a dull, final thud. One officer stayed by the door. The other stood directly in front of Marcus, close enough to invade space, far enough to watch for flinches. You want to tell us what you're really doing here? The officer asked. Marcus met his gaze. Traveling. The officer exhaled sharply through his nose. You already tried that. What answer are you looking for? Marcus asked. The officer's face hardened. The honest one. Silence stretched. The hum of fluorescent lights filled it. You got a lot of nerve, the officer continued. Standing out there questioning us like you know the law. Marcus tilted his head slightly. I asked a question. You challenged authority. I exercised a right. That was the wrong word. The officer slammed a palm on the table. The sound echoed off the walls. Don't lecture me. The second officer shifted, hand near his taser. Not because there was a threat, but because posture mattered. Dominance mattered. Outside the room, life went on. Flights boarded. Coffee was poured. Children cried. Somewhere, Marcus's boarding group was being called. Inside, time slowed. Where'd you get this ID? The officer asked, holding it up again. From my agency. What agency? Marcus didn't answer. The officer laughed once, short and humorless. Figures. He stepped out of the room briefly, leaving the door ajar. Marcus could hear muffled voices. Radios crackling. A supervisor being mentioned, then dismissed. This'll be quick, someone said. He's bluffing. When the officer returned, his confidence had sharpened. Here's how this is going to go, he said. You're going to sit tight. We're going to verify some things. And if you lied, it gets worse. Marcus nodded once. You're free to verify. That answer irritated them more than denial would have. Minutes passed. Then more. They took his bag. Opened it. Spread its contents across the table. Clothes folded neatly. A book. A phone. No contraband. No confusion. No disorder. Real clean, the officer muttered. Too clean. Marcus watched silently. They asked again where he worked. Again he didn't answer. Stonewalling doesn't help you, the second officer said. We can hold you. Under what authority? Marcus asked calmly. The officer scoffed. Airport security. Airport security has limits, Marcus replied. The officer leaned in. So do you. Outside the room, the video had already started spreading. A woman who'd filmed the initial detention sent it to her brother. He sent it to a group chat. Someone posted it with a caption that asked a simple question: why is this man in cuffs? Views climbed quietly. Not viral yet. But moving back in the room, the supervisor finally arrived, Sergeant Collins. Late 40s. Years on the job. He glanced at Marcus once, then at the officers. What we got? He asked. Suspicious male. Non-compliant. Questioning authority, one officer said quickly. Collins looked at Marcus again. Noticed the posture. The calm. The lack of sweat. The eyes. You got a name? Collins asked. Marcus Reed. Marcus replied. Collins checked the ID. His brow creased slightly. Not alarm. Recognition of something unfamiliar. You traveling alone? Collins asked. Yes. Purpose? Work. What kind? Marcus paused, just long enough to matter. Federal. The word landed softly. But it landed. Collins straightened a fraction. Federal what? Marcus met his gaze. You can call it in. Collins looked back at the officers. Did we run him? System lag, one officer said. Didn't come back clean. Collins frowned. Everything comes back clean or dirty. He stepped aside, radioing someone quietly. The room filled with static and low-voiced codes. Marcus watched the red camera light blink steadily above them. Time passed differently now. The officer's confidence wavered, not gone, but cracked. Outside, the video crossed 10,000 views. Inside, Collins ended the call slowly. What exactly did you say you did? He asked Marcus again. Marcus didn't smile. He didn't smirk. He simply answered, clearly, I said you could verify. The room felt smaller. Collins glanced at the cuffs. Then at the officers. Then back at Marcus. For the first time since the detention began, no one spoke for several seconds, and in that silence, authority began to tilt. Sergeant Collins broke the silence by sitting down, not across from Marcus, beside the officers. It was a small choice. A deliberate one. Until we verify who you are, Collins said, tone measured. You're staying right here. Marcus nodded. I understand. The officer nearest the door smirked. See? Cooperation goes a long way. Marcus didn't respond. Collins stood again and stepped outside, pulling the door closed behind him. The lock clicked. The sound lingered. Inside the room, the atmosphere shifted immediately. Without the supervisor present, the officers relaxed into something more familiar, unchecked authority. The first officer leaned against the table, arms crossed, eyes scanning Marcus with renewed confidence. You know, he said casually, you could have avoided all this. Marcus looked up. By doing what? By not acting like you're above us. I never said that. You didn't have to, the officer replied. Your tone did. Marcus breathed slowly. He had heard this before. Not here. Not tonight. But enough times to recognize the pattern. You ask questions, the officer continued. That puts us on edge. Questions are legal, Marcus said. The officer laughed. So is detention. He walked to the wall and pressed a button. A small red light switched on above the door. Recordings off. He said that it wasn't. The officer didn't know that. Or didn't care. The second officer circled behind Marcus, close enough that Marcus could feel his presence. The cuffs were still tight. Too tight. Intentionally so. Let me ask you something, the second officer said. Why do guys like you always think rules are negotiable? Marcus closed his eyes briefly. Not in submission. In restraint. Guys like me? He asked. The officer shrugged. You know what I mean. No, Marcus said evenly. I don't. The officer leaned in closer. Smart. Educated. Think the badge doesn't apply to you. Marcus opened his eyes and turned his head slightly. The badge applies to everyone. The officer's jaw tightened. You really want to play this game? He asked. I didn't start it, Marcus replied. The officer's hand pressed harder against Marcus's shoulder. Pain flared. Still, Marcus didn't react. Careful, the officer said. You're already pushing it. Marcus looked straight ahead. You're recording this. The officer froze for half a second, then he laughed louder than necessary. You think that little camera matters? It always does, Marcus said. The officer stepped back, annoyed now. They left Marcus alone in the room, not because they were done, because neglect was another form of control. Minutes turned into longer minutes. No water. No explanation. No updates. His flight departed without him. He knew that. He didn't check the time. He didn't need to. Outside the room, Collins paced. He'd made another call. Then another. Something wasn't lining up. The ID was real. The system wasn't cooperating. Federal records didn't behave like local ones. That alone made him uneasy, but unease didn't stop procedure. Inside, the officers returned. Stand up, one ordered. Marcus complied. They searched him again. More aggressively this time. Hands rough. Movements exaggerated. This isn't necessary, Marcus said calmly. It is when we say it is, the officer replied. They turned his pockets inside out. Found nothing. Again, where's the rest of it? One officer asked. The rest of what? Marcus asked. Whatever you're hiding. Marcus shook his head slightly. I'm not. That answer earned him a shove back into the chair. Don't test us, the officer warned. From the hallway, voices rose. Collins arguing quietly with someone on the phone. The words, federal clearance, and jurisdiction, floated through the door. The officers exchanged a glance, not fear, defensiveness. They lowered their voices. You tell Collins anything? One asked Marcus. I told him the truth, Marcus replied. The officer scoffed. Your truth. Another pause. Outside, the video passed 50,000 views. Inside the room, the officers made a decision. If this comes back messy, one said, that's on you. Marcus looked at him. No, he said softly. It isn't. The officer stiffened. You threatening me? I'm stating a fact. The door opened. Collins stood there, his expression tighter now, more controlled. He looked at Marcus, then at the officers. Step out, he said to them, reluctantly. They did. The door closed again. The lock disengaged. Collins faced Marcus alone. You want to help me understand something? Collins asked. Marcus nodded. Yes. You federal law enforcement? Collins asked. Yes. Collins swallowed. Active? Yes. Armed? No. On assignment? Yes. Collins exhaled slowly. They shouldn't have treated you like this, he said. Marcus met his eyes. They chose to. Collins glanced at the cuffs. Hesitated. Until I get confirmation, he said. They stay on. Marcus didn't argue. Outside, Collins spoke sharply to the officers now. Their posture had changed. Less confident. More rigid. Radios crackled again. Names were exchanged. Agencies mentioned quietly. The officers who detained Marcus avoided looking at him now. They stood straighter. Spoke less, because authority, once questioned, never returns the same. And somewhere beyond the walls of the interview room, the video crossed 100,000 views. Comments shifted from confusion to certainty. This doesn't look right. Why are they holding him? They messed up. Marcus sat quietly as the system began turning against itself. The misuse was documented, the tone was captured, the choices were recorded. And none of it could be undone. The confirmation came quietly, not with alarms, not with urgency, not with drama, just a change in tone. Sergeant Collins stood in the hallway with his radio pressed close, shoulders squared, eyes fixed on the floor as if grounding himself. The voice on the other end wasn't raised, but it was unmistakably firm. The kind of firmness that didn't ask questions because it already knew the answers. Yes, Collins said. Understood. He didn't argue. He didn't clarify. He didn't justify. When the call ended, he stayed still for several seconds, absorbing the weight of what had just been confirmed. Then he turned. The officers straightened instinctively as Collins approached. Their casual authority evaporated, replaced by something tighter, more careful. Unlock the door, Collins said. One officer hesitated. Just a fraction. Then complied. The door opened. Marcus looked up. Collins stepped inside alone and closed the door behind him, not locking it this time. Mr. Reed, Collins said, and for the first time, he used the title deliberately. I've just spoken with your agency. Marcus nodded once. Then you know. Yes, Collins replied. I do. He reached forward and removed the handcuffs himself. The metal clicked open softly, almost apologetically. Marcus rolled his shoulders slowly, letting circulation return, his expression unchanged. No satisfaction. No relief. Just composure. You're a Federal Air Marshal, Collins said. Active. Cleared. On assignment. Yes. You were never required to disclose that, Collins added quietly. No, Marcus replied. I wasn't. Collins swallowed. You were detained without probable cause. Marcus didn't respond and handled improperly. Collins continued. By officers who exceeded their authority. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy. Outside the room, the officers waited. Stiff. Alert. Listening, Collins opened the door and stepped out with Marcus beside him. The hallway felt different now. The officers avoided Marcus's eyes. Stand by, Collins ordered them. The officer who'd first grabbed Marcus shifted his weight. Sergeant, stand by. The interruption died immediately. Collins turned back to Marcus. Your flight has departed. Transportation will be arranged. That won't be necessary, Marcus said. I'll handle it. Collins nodded. Of course. He paused, then added, there's something else. Marcus waited. This incident was recorded, Collins said. By multiple cameras. And, by civilians. Marcus met his gaze. I'm aware. Collins exhaled. The footage is already circulating. Yes, Marcus said again. Outside the secure hallway, the airport was waking up to it. The clip had crossed 200,000 views. The framing was simple. Clear. Uncomfortable. A calm man in cuffs. Officers aggressive. Questions unanswered. No edits. No commentary, just reality. Inside the hallway, Collins turned to the officers again. You are relieved of duty effective immediately, he said. Turn in your equipment. The words landed hard. One officer stiffened. Sergeant, we followed protocol. No, Collins replied evenly. You followed assumption. The other officer opened his mouth, then closed it. He knew better now. This matter is being escalated, Collins continued. Internal Affairs has been notified. So has Federal Oversight. Marcus didn't watch their reactions. He didn't need to. The authority reversal wasn't loud. It wasn't public, yet, but it was absolute. As Collins walked Marcus back toward the public terminal, people stared, not because Marcus was in cuffs, because he wasn't anymore. Whispers followed them. That's him. That's the guy from the video. Why'd they grab him? Phones lifted again, but this time, the tone was different. Curious. Watchful. Alert. At the threshold between restricted access and public space, Collins stopped. For what it's worth, he said quietly, I'm sorry. Marcus looked at him. What happens next matters more. Collins nodded. Behind them, the officers stood frozen in the corridor they'd once controlled. Ahead of them, the terminal buzzed with a different kind of energy now, one sharpened by awareness. The video crossed 500,000 views. Headlines hadn't hit yet, but they would, because the story was no longer about a detained man. It was about who he really was. And what the system did when it assumed it could act without consequence. The consequences didn't arrive all at once. They never did. They unfolded methodically, layer by layer, through systems that preferred silence but were now forced into motion. By the time Marcus Reed exited the airport, the narrative had already shifted beyond the terminal walls. The video was no longer framed as a misunderstanding. It had become a record, clear, chronological, undeniable. A calm man questioned, authority provoked, force applied without cause, and now, context. Major outlets picked it up before sunrise. Not sensationally. Carefully. Because the facts were clean. The footage spoke without embellishment. A federal air marshal wrongfully detained at major U.S. airport. The phrasing mattered. Inside the airport's operations office, screens replayed the footage on loop. Executives watched without comment. Legal counsel took notes. Risk managers calculated exposure with quiet urgency. The officers involved were placed on administrative leave before their shift officially ended. Badges surrendered. Firearms logged. Access revoked, not as punishment. YET.AS procedure. Internal Affairs opened a formal investigation by midday. Federal Oversight followed within hours. Jurisdiction had crossed lines the moment Marcus was cuffed. Statements were requested, reports were pulled, timelines were reconstructed, and discrepancies surfaced immediately. The officers' written accounts conflicted with video evidence. Their language, non-compliant, agitated, refused commands, collapsed when measured against the footage's calm reality. One officer amended his statement twice, the other declined further comment. By afternoon, Marcus sat in a quiet federal office miles away from the airport. He wasn't being interviewed. He was being briefed. "This will escalate," a senior official said evenly. "Public interest is accelerating." Marcus listened. "It should." The official nodded. "Your agency supports full transparency." "I wouldn't expect less," Marcus replied. Back at the airport, Sergeant Collins submitted his own report. It was factual. Sparse. Honest. That he didn't defend the officers. That he didn't deflect responsibility. That he documented what happened. That choice mattered. By evening, the officers were formally suspended pending outcome. Union representatives arrived. Lawyers followed. The posture changed from authority to defense. Online, the reaction sharpened. The comment sections weren't chaotic. They were focused. Why were his rights ignored? Why did they turn off the recording? Why didn't the supervisor intervene sooner? The footage was slowed down. Analyzed. Replayed, frame by frame, every hand placement, every word, every pause. What had felt routine to the officers now looked deliberate under scrutiny. By the second day, one officer's prior complaints resurfaced. Not viral, but present. Excessive force allegations quietly settled years earlier. Patterns emerging not through accusation, but documentation. The department released a statement that we take this matter seriously. An internal review is underway. It satisfied no one. By the third day, the officer's suspension became termination proceedings, not announced loudly, not televised, just confirmed. The justification was precise: violation of conduct policy, misuse of authority, procedural breaches. Their actions hadn't just been wrong, they'd been indefensible. Marcus remained silent publicly. He didn't give interviews. He didn't post statements. His restraint unsettled some commentators. Inspired others. He didn't need to speak, the system was speaking for him. At the airport, training sessions were quietly scheduled. Policies reviewed. Supervisors briefed. The incident had crossed too many lines to be dismissed. Federal agencies requested compliance audits. Airport policing agreements were revisited. Memorandums rewritten, not out of goodwill, out of necessity. Sergeant Collins was reassigned pending review. Not punished. Not praised. Evaluated. His decision to escalate had mitigated damage, but not erased it. He accepted that. On the fifth day, the department released the final update. The officers were dismissed. The investigation concluded. Corrective actions mandated. No excuses offered. No blame shifted. The announcement was short. Almost clinical, but the impact was lasting. Marcus watched none of it live. He stood at another airport now. Another terminal. Another gate. This time, no one stopped him. No one questioned his calm. No one mistook dignity for defiance, because consequences, once visible, change behavior long after headlines fade, and somewhere behind the scenes, systems adjusted, not because they wanted to, but because they had been exposed. Reform never announced itself as reform. It arrived disguised as compliance. In the weeks following the incident, the airport authority moved carefully, almost quietly, as if sudden transparency might draw attention they no longer controlled. Policies were not rewritten overnight. They were reinterpreted, reissued with clarifying language that left no room for improvisation. Reasonable suspicion was defined, detention authority narrowed, recording protocols reinforced. Every word mattered now. Supervisors were instructed to intervene earlier. Body cameras were mandated to remain active during all secondary screenings. No exceptions, no discretion. The button that officers once pressed casually was now tied to automatic reporting flags. Turn it off, and someone else would know. Training modules were updated. Not with lectures. With footage, the same video, unedited. Unblurred. Shown in silence, recruits watched the calm man in cuffs. The questions asked. The hands placed where they didn't need to be. Instructors didn't narrate, they didn't have to. Across multiple airports, federal agencies issued joint advisories. Not accusatory. Directive. Local enforcement does not supersede federal jurisdiction. Questioning authority is not resistance. Silence is not obstruction. Language that had once been implied was now explicit. Civil rights groups took notice, not because they were invited, but because the record demanded oversight. Meetings were held. Observers present. Commitments made on paper, not just press releases. For the first time in years, the airport authority allowed independent review of detention procedures, not unlimited, not permanent, but real. Behind closed doors, administrators acknowledged what they never would publicly: the incident had forced their hand. Insurance premiums rose. Legal counsel expanded. Risk models adjusted to account for viral accountability. That was the new variable. Marcus Reed's name appeared nowhere in the reform documents. Intentionally, the changes weren't framed as a response to him, they were framed as improvements, but everyone inside the system knew. At a national law enforcement conference months later, the case was referenced indirectly. A recent airport incident used as a teaching example of authority miscalculation. No names. No footage, just consequences. Sergeant Collins attended one of the reform briefings. He sat near the back, listening. Not defensive. Reflective. When the presenter reached the slide about early intervention, Collins nodded once that he understood now, not just what had gone wrong, but why waiting had made it worse. The officers who had detained Marcus never returned to airport policing. One found work elsewhere. The other faded from public record entirely. No redemption. No public reckoning, just absence, and absence, in systems like these, was a form of correction. At the airport where it began, signage changed subtly. Notices about rights during security screening were placed more visibly. The language was plain. Accessible. Passengers noticed, some read it, some didn't, but it was there. Months later, a junior officer paused before stopping a traveler who asked too many questions. He hesitated. Looked up at the camera. Adjusted his tone, and let the man pass. No report was filed. No incident logged, but something had shifted. Reform wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, procedural, and uncelebrated, which was exactly how it lasted. Marcus Reed never spoke publicly about what happened, not because he was told not to, not because he was afraid of consequences, because the story no longer belonged to him. Weeks later, he stood at another airport, early morning light stretching across the terminal floor. The environment was familiar: announcements, footsteps, the low hum of movement, but the feeling was different now, sharper. More aware. A uniformed officer scanned the crowd. His eyes passed over Marcus, paused for half a second, then moved on. No challenge. No interruption, just restraint. Marcus adjusted the strap of his bag and continued walking. What had happened to him wasn't unique. That was the truth beneath the story. It had felt routine because it was routine, until it wasn't allowed to be anymore. That was the difference. Across the country, people who had watched the video moved on to other headlines, other outrages, other moments of collective attention. But something lingered underneath their scrolling. A recognition: the injustice hadn't been loud, the correction hadn't been violent, the power reversal hadn't required aggression. It had required patience, documentation, and the calm refusal to surrender dignity. That was what stayed with people. In comment sections long after the story faded from the front page, one line kept appearing in different forms: he didn't raise his voice, and that's why it worked. Marcus returned to his work. Quiet. Uncelebrated. Necessary. He didn't carry the incident with him like a badge or a wound. He carried it like a reminder: authority was never the uniform. It was the rule set, and who was allowed to ignore it. At the airport where it began, life resumed its rhythm. Travelers hurried. Officers patrolled. Screens flashed departures and delays, but somewhere in the control room, the footage still existed. Archived. Time-stamped. Immutable, not as a warning. As a record, and records have power. They wait patiently, they don't argue, they don't forget. Every system eventually meets a moment where its assumptions are tested. Most of those moments never make headlines. They pass quietly, absorbed by those with the least power. This one didn't, not because the man detained was special, but because the system misjudged who it could afford to ignore. The lesson wasn't that authority should fear exposure. It was that authority should expect it. Phones are everywhere now, cameras are always on, witnesses are no longer silent, and dignity, when held steadily, has a way of outlasting arrogance. If this story unsettled you, it wasn't meant to entertain you. It was meant to remind you. Rights don't disappear when they're questioned, they disappear when no one insists on them. The next time you see someone stopped without explanation, spoken to without respect, or detained without clarity, pay attention, not with outrage, with awareness, because accountability doesn't begin with shouting, that it begins with watching.